last minute nerves, but yeah, we've got a juicy panel for you today. Before I introduce the panelists, I'm actually going to set the scene a little bit. So, as we kind of mentioned, I am a futurist. I spend most of my time living 10 years ahead of the future, interpreting the future for big brands such as Heinz and the future of baked beans, the future of chocolate, whatever the topic. But of course my speciality is the future of women's health. So we've had a lot of kind of talk today, and I just wanted to take us back a minute and ground ourselves in the kind of horizon we're looking at. So the era is 2030. You have woken up by your multiple gadgets, all your kind of things that, your wearables that kind of bringing you awake in the morning. You switch on the news, it's not a pretty story. We've been living in 10 years of perma-crises. Climate change is a climate crisis. Sustainability imperatives are much more important than kind of sustainability impact. Populations have been in flux. We're seeing kind of migration due to the climate crisis, but also we're seeing a boom in the aging population and a decline in fertility rates. And this is putting more and more pressure on governments and, of course, the rest of society to solve some of these problems. Unfortunately, we're not a united society. There is deepening social stratification and political unrest. It's a bleak picture, but here's the good news. 10 years ago, we sat on a panel like this, and we got our greatest minds together, whether that be designers, founders, or investors, and we talked about what we could do to prepare for the future. So we may not be able to change the course of climate change, but what we can do is create ideas and solutions to make sure that we are prepared for that future. So without further ado, here are some of our brilliant minds, and I'm going to hand over to them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about kind of the role you currently play in the sustainability world, or perhaps the role you'd like to play as we approach that big future we're talking about today.
Me first?
Charlie, yeah, you first.
So my name's Charlie, clearly, and I run a business called Ancestors. Essentially started as a period care brand, but we've sort of branched out now into sort of reproductive health. And we take sustainability really at the core of everything we do. So we sell essentially period product of all product topologies and single-use and reusable. So we sell 100% organic cotton period care, which encompasses tampons, both applicator and applicator, pads and liners, all absorbencies for all flows and demographics. And then we also have period pants, and our period pants are 100% organic cotton, so no polyurethane at all. And then we also sell our period cup, which is the nudie, which is kind of like our hero product, the most sustainable, especially relevant for this panel, in terms of its longevity, durability, but also in terms of its makeup and full life cycle assessment. And then we have an add-on product, which is our stain remover, which is a plant-based stain remover, which is tackling vaginal discharge and period leaks, but in reality will actually target any organic matter stain, and product efficacy will perform better than any of the mainstream brands, so you sort of Vanish, etc. So if you haven't tried it, I highly recommend it. For anyone that has children, on your baby poo stains, try it. It's like a godsend. Had a child 11 months ago and said we found that use case. We also have a lot of men that use the product actually to remove blood stains from shirts after shaving or shaving at work maybe. We're a reasonably young business, but we have sort of popped ahead, I said, above the crowd as being sort of one of the leading sustainable challenger period care brands, stocked in a lot of major retail outlets, as well as obviously retailing the products ourselves and through Amazon. And it's really expanded very fast from just the UK market to now actually servicing almost everywhere in the world, with the exception of the US and Canada, which is more of a regulatory reason. Australia, just too far for now, but servicing pretty much the rest of the world. Oh, and China, sorry, we also haven't touched China. In terms of our sustainability credentials, we are the highest scoring B Corp globally within menstrual health, and actually within women's health as well. We don't tend to talk too much about that, and as I said, of sustainability, we don't just treat it in terms of the products or the materials and products and processes that go into developing the products ourselves, but in terms of the whole approach that we take to it. I'll probably stop there, otherwise I'll monologue for a long time.
Yeah, you're going to steal some of my lines I've got coming up, Charlie. But yeah, we will get into more about the brand shortly. Emily, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Emily and I'm an investor at True. We are a consumer-focused investment and innovation firm based in London. We have three main areas to our business. The first of those is a venture fund, which myself and my colleague at the back, Myriam, sit in. The venture fund, we look to back consumer brands, retail technology and sustainable technology companies at Series A, sort of seed to Series A stage. We also have a larger private equity firm, as well as an innovation consultancy business. And I guess bringing it to your question around sustainability, I personally feel a sense of responsibility that we should be backing both the change makers of our current society and also ensuring that we have a well diversified pool of founders who's going to make that change happen. And with the capital behind us, that's what we're really going out to look for.
Amazing. And last but not least.
Hi, I'm Myriam, working for Designit, and that is a design agency working for all different sorts of companies or an organization who want to create new products and services. And I'm a service designer, so part of that is understanding customer needs, understanding what do people really need that are using services or products, but also looking a little bit inside and thinking how can we create the organizations in a way that they can deliver the services in the best possible way. And that, of course, in looking at this context that we're already experiencing now, and that you've just set the stage very well, is around how can we do that in a way that really empowers people that are, for now, still buying things, but also these people are also working in organizations. So how can we create the right cultures? How can we create the right ways of working to enable a more just future? And also, of course, it also considers our planetary boundaries. So.
Amazing. So let's start there. Let's get straight into it. So we've set the scene. We know kind of what you're hoping to achieve. Let's talk a little bit about design practices and design approach. I think there's been a lot of talk this morning on various panels about kind of centering the consumer, about creating products that aren't just kind of innovation for innovation's sake. Can you talk to us about how we design in a sustainable way, considering all of the solutions that we have to cover? We don't have time to cover the ones that don't even need solving. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think when you design a product or a service, it's very quickly you immerse yourself into a very complex scenario, right? So you want to decide for who's your user, who's target audience, what is the problem you're solving, what is the technology you're using, and it's very easy to immediately go for, okay, this is the target audience, and therefore let's design for them. And that's been historically, I think, in the design field, a lot of the consensus to do that. And I think in the recent years we kind of started to understand that there is harm that we can do, or that we do by accident. And if we don't catch these situations early enough, we are a bit late with measures. So. And I think that's the awakening that goes through our industry right now. I mean, we've all seen in social media how this can, how different services actually can deepening the body shaming issues for a woman. It can increase people's depression, etc. So how do we design solutions that are aware of this?
And one of my favorite examples I've seen out there is Yoni, who redesigned the smear test experience, the cervical exam, everything from kind of the experience on the app beforehand right through to kind of the tools that are used. And they did that using radical empathy as part of the design process. Is that something you're familiar with? Are there other processes that you use? I mean, I'm not a design head, so please tell me kind of what.
No, yeah, I think radical empathy and deep listening, I think is something that I think everywhere, not just the design profession, but everybody, we as a society need to think about how can we be more, sit here and listen to what's present. And that is, for example, when at the beginning of when we start the project, understanding what are the team members here in this group, if we want to create a new startup, if we want to create a new product, what do we bring to the table? What are the biases? What is the knowledge? What values do we bring in here? Because when we design a product, we take thousands micro decisions at every stage, and becoming more aware of that helps us to then change the way how we think about it, so we can understand who are we not seeing right now, whose needs do we don't understand of our target audience, and then recruit particularly for them. particularly reach out to say like, okay, how can we create more understanding about this?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just kind of the first part of the process, right? Once we've got a product developed and it's gone to market, we need VC and we need investors, we need a little bit of money, right? So how do you go about kind of, you must see a million pictures, you know, you must see kind of new products coming on the market every day. How do you look from an investor's perspective and say, this is how we can create health equity, this is how we can create a better world through the ways that we invest? How do you evaluate? How do you kind of set the right measures for those brands? And expand upon that. Tell us a little bit more about sustainability in the investment process.
Sure, so I think it starts with like, what is the fund's own thesis, like what is their investment goal? So for us, I mentioned, you know, we're mainly a consumer-focused fund from both the product, services and technology perspective, but really at the base of it, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to like back the future, like the leaders of tomorrow, people who are going to change the future. I'm looking for those companies that are forefront of consumer behavioural change. Unfortunately, sustainability is something that consumers really are starting to care about. Conscious consumerism is a thing, and I think it's sort of a two-way circle. Like obviously we're putting more sustainable brands out there so that people want them, and vice versa, and getting more education. So I think like for us as a fund, we genuinely care about sustainability, and that forms a key point of everything that we look at. You know, you're not going to see us back a super fast fashion brand that's polluting the environment, for example. And I think also we talk less maybe about sustainability and more about ESG, because I think sometimes you can forget the social element of sustainability. Yeah. So many amazing founders and startups focusing on the environmental side, but we're really passionate about democratizing access to capital and ensuring that everybody gets a chance of creating a more sustainable future. I'm super proud that I've been part of backing some amazing sustainable brands that are changing industries. One of mine, the most relevant to this group is Floose, which is the world's first flushable sanitary pad. So not only does it create a great consumer experience for me, not having to touch disgusting bins, but also it kind of completely disappears and makes no impact on the planet. And I work with a number of sort of startups in the sustainable field. And I think when we're sitting around the table at a board meeting, yes, like financial performance is important, but also we are very cognizant of like what is our environmental or social impact that we're having. Yeah. One of my beauty brands hires a lot of sort of ex-offenders or people from really difficult social backgrounds to try and again like create wealth in difficult areas. So that's super important to us. And then finally, I guess we practice what we preach. We're a B Corp, so luckily I didn't have to do any of the hard work to get the B Corp. I just get to like talk about it. But we're a B Corp, so we do, you know, we're always out there looking for and have a commitment to sustainability. And then the final thing I wanted to touch on was like how passionate both True is and especially myself about backing female founders and underrepresented founders. I'm super proud that our portfolio has 30% female founders when under 2% of venture funding goes to female founders. Now 30% isn't great, or it's where I want to stop, but at least it kind of shows a commitment towards supporting kind of underrepresented founders. So I guess going full circle to your question, I think it's about making sure like investors have the right ethics within their investment strategy, that they're being open about what does sustainability mean, and that they are having a diverse approach to who the founders are that they want to back.
Yeah, I love that, really love that. And we mentioned B Corp there. Charlie, I've got a list here. So I understand that you are B Corp certified, you partner with 1% of the 1% for the Planet, the Soil Association and Global Organic Textile Standard. I think it's fair to say that you are a leader, if not the leader, in the menstrual health space in terms of sustainability, but that's very much today. If we think about kind of the future and the picture I just painted there, how do you think you're going to need to evolve and adapt to maintain that kind of those accolades as being the best or the first? What's really going to change over the next 10 years and what are you thinking about in terms of future-proofing the business? Big question.
So in the early days of Ancestors, it was very much about using existing technologies because we didn't have the money to spend on the R&D to develop a new material, or, for example, to play with existing materials to improve the functional aspects of it. So the earliest product that we developed was very much kind of putting together existing technologies that allowed us to sort of design the product to its, I suppose our original principles was essentially that it lives as lightly on the planet as possible and functionally performs better than anything that's available on the market, which is pretty challenging to do. Over time, we've had a bit more money that we've had invested through investors, but also obviously making it ourselves, and that allows us to delve even deeper, or I'd say even to the third and the fourth and the fifth degree, to be able to really innovate the product, to try and essentially be at the forefront of even material science, but equally at the same time making sure that we're always solving for a consumer problem, and not endorsing behaviors that, you know, in the end you feel like you're doing a good thing, but they can actually result in even more of a negative impact than what you originally set out to do. For us, we're looking at the existing materials that we currently have and really trying to innovate them even further to, again, make sure they functionally perform better than anything that else is available on the market, so still the same design principle, but strip out any of the environmental damage that's created from our existing products. We obviously sell single use and we sell reusable, and you know, some people might say that single use is kind of contradictory actually to wanting to endorse a sort of sustainable journey, but the way I see it is that if Ancestors is really going to make an impact on what is menstrual health today, we need to have mass consumer, and if we can't obtain mass consumer, we can't obtain the money to be able to really innovate the product. And the reality is that consumers don't really change. Especially not in the time frame required to build a business to the scale that we need to build a business at. And so you kind of need to take the behaviors that they currently have and not rely on them to change. So the single use basically provides the most seamless transition into sustainable period care. And within single use, we do have the most sustainable product because we innovated at every single layer of the product, whether that's to do with the tampon or whether that's to do with the pad. And then we try and shift you onto a reusable journey, which obviously cannibalizes, if you like, almost like the LTV of our existing consumer. But for us, the way we kind of treat our business, you know, when we talk to investors, is always financials first, but that's not actually entirely true. We try to basically produce the best product, produce the best marketing around why our product is better, and the financials follow. And you know, whilst that journey might be, well, whilst that thinking might be slightly atypical, it served us well to date. You know, talk to me in 5 years' time as to whether that's still the case.
5 years, 10 years, we're going to do this panel regularly. Track our
exactly. And then the last point for us is we're expanding outside of menstrual health. So, you know, like, to give you some examples, when you think about our product, right, we have to absorb fluid, right? We have to absorb fluid well. That's in terms of viscosity and velocity. But that's relevant to lots of other markets. For example, incontinence, which can be your light or stress incontinence, so peeing when you sneeze after childbirth, etc. But equally the heavy incontinence. And the major challenge for us with heavy incontinence, which no one in the world has solved for, is to produce product with fully natural composition is impossible with existing material science because the absorbency of natural fibers is not good enough. So you need to absorb about 200 ml at one time of obviously extremely low viscosity. And when you think about menstrual blood, you know, a heavy period is, I think, by the NHS over 80 ml, but 120 ml would be a very heavy period over quite a long period of time. Whereas with obviously pee, it's 200 ml at that point in time. And so developing the product to be able to deal with that is very challenging, and then you can move on to nappies and things like that.
And that aging population being a huge kind of, I think somebody said earlier, statistic about the use of nappies or kind of diapers now for the elderly population outweighing that for the kind of infant population. And so I think as we start to see those shifts, you know, what is mass market will soon change across the next 10 years as well. So new opportunities opening up. So kind of question to all of you to wrap up before we kind of open it up to the audience. At the moment, the conversation is focusing a lot on menstrual care becoming more sustainable, a lot on kind of removing toxins, making sure materials are organic, and kind of, the social responsibility around period poverty. If we stretch ourselves a little bit more, what are the topics that are kind of untapped or need solutions across the next 10 years that we really think that we should start talking about now in order to innovate and have solutions for by the time we need them? Big question.
This actually isn't related specifically to women's health, but I think there's been a great movement in sort of sustainability 1.0 towards using things that are maybe recyclable, but actually that still does create waste. And so for me, I think it's really exciting to see the next wave of innovation that are potentially using waste streams to create new products, and also things that are completely compostable. And when it says compostable, I mean home compostable. Taking things to an industrial composter probably is not going to happen. It creates so much waste still. So I think the sustainability 2.0, the next wave, will be how do we use the resources that are maybe already waste and change it into a new product that has a new life and creates genuine circularity in the ecosystem.
Yeah, amazing.
And I think in order to build upon that, maybe there is something around like the products that we use, but also generally our understanding of sustainability, and in terms of how much do we, that's now becomes like, the risk of this is becoming philosophical now, but of like how much are we separate from nature and the planet, and becoming very much more in tune with, like, during our work, when we talk about like women's health, like a lot of it is also becoming in tune with our bodies. So the same is a journey to becoming to tune more with the planet. And therefore I do think if we manage to do that more, then we're also able to think about new solutions, because we understand more intrinsically water streams and how they affect the products that we build, how they affect the waste processes. We understand more the systems that are around us, and therefore can innovate in a different way.
Yeah, I think when we think about conscious consumerism and like the say-do gap, I think one of the things that's really key to closing the say-do gap for consumers, and potentially also for designers, is understanding and education, bringing it closer to home. And the more that the climate crisis kind of ramps up and comes closer to home, that's when people start really understanding and changing behaviours. So, yeah. Anything to add?
Yeah, two very good points.
Yeah.
Education for me is, I think that the reality is there's so many technologies exist today and that don't need innovation, or a change that essentially can pretty much drive us to hit the goals that have been set, whichever national institution you look at. But the reality is the education doesn't exist, and it's kind of forced onto the consumer to kind of make their own decisions. You know, within our space, as an example, you know, back in 2016, we're essentially one of the only challenger period care brands, and then 2019, 2020 you had pretty much everyone starting period care brands. And the shame within that period of time was we had some period care brands which still exist today, which are seen as challengers, which haven't innovated the product at all and still putting the most unsustainable product and toxins, as we've talked about before, into the product. And that dilutes and muddies the water for the consumer, because I can tell you, you know, if I didn't know the market as well as I did, and I looked at a Boots shelf and had to pick our product, or a sustainable product, it's very challenging for the consumer. But the consumer does have a say, because if you can push the governments, regulators, investors to, you know, put their money essentially where their mouth is, well, actually, with the existing technologies we have today that doesn't require these 50-year solutions, kind of like the nuclear fusion argument, right? Keep pushing money to 50 years down the line. The reality is the money needs to flow into the solutions that solve the problem today, and then educating the consumer on essentially, right, these products, this technology is good, this one's not. And if we can get to a slightly more sort of, I suppose in a way, almost like a binary scale. It's kind of like you meet the threshold, you're in, you're out the club, right? Would be really, really helpful, I think, in today's world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, actually, two other questions. So, the circular economy kind of aspect of it, how does it really work with menstrual care products, for example?
Yeah, Charlie, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so we do have some circularity in the ecosystem already. For example, things like cups and pans, right? They can be recycled and then remade into pants or into cups. You're talking about a 10-year life cycle. It's kind of, I suppose, like the circular economy tends to focus on things like replacing single use on like meal takeaways and things like that. But obviously, it's extremely relevant for period care. But we already have the solution that exists today. You know, menstrual cups are the most sustainable option that are available, and they're easily recyclable. The challenge, obviously, is the fact that not everyone is comfortable with insertion. And so period pants are your next best. They don't last as long, but from a sustainability perspective, relative to your tampons or your pads or whatever you're using today, you know, I can guarantee you're talking about, you know, multiples of reduction in your CO2 emissions, as well as obviously all of the other sustainability credentials we need to talk about.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry, do you have something to add? Yeah, should we go here first?
Okay, hi. My name is Lola, and really great talk. Thank you for all of your pitches. So I'm entering into the fashion, textiles, and medical textiles manufacturing industry after just having it in the background of my life from my parents for quite a long time. I'm just entering it for myself. And one thing I'm finding really challenging is the sustainability aspect of things. I'm sure you're very familiar with it. How do you approach trying to find a good manufacturing facility based locally in the UK? Have you had an issue with that before? Because it seems to me that in especially fashion textiles and more so medical textiles manufacturing, the most efficient way of producing things is in a factory on the other side of the world where, okay, you could have the most efficient way of sustainably producing something, but it's in Vietnam and you have to fly over, which is huge air miles. Do you have the same issue when you're manufacturing, for instance, menstruation products? Is that something that you do as well? Do you have to opt for a financially sustainable option in another country, or have you managed to find facilities in the UK? And if not, like, what's the approach to generating it and creating it?
Anyone want to take that one?
I've never produced anything, so
I can take it. I can take it. Depends on your approach to sustainability, right? By that I mean, you can find a factory that is located 10 miles from your house. It's going to bring down your air miles, it's going to bring down, it's going to bring also your road miles as well, right? The reality is you kind of have to be true to yourself when you develop is, what if you really care about the sustainable journey, well, where do the products that go in, where do the materials that go into your product come from? Yeah. So, for example, with us, we use organic cotton for the majority of our product portfolio. Majority of that is produced either in India, in China, a little bit in Ukraine, obviously not so much anymore, or definitely not being exported, and then in the US. So you have to ask yourself, if you're doing the proper assessment, is it better to manufacture the product closer to where the materials are being grown and cultivated versus, well, my scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 are going to be a lot lower if I produce it in the UK. We have manufacturing all over the world, mostly in Europe. We've just opened up a facility in the UK, and we have a little bit of manufacturing in China, which we're moving purely for a sustainable perspective. But it's been a really hard argument. We're moving from a Chinese manufacturing facility into a UK manufacturing facility for a very small component of our product. And from a life cycle assessment point of view, actually the gains are pretty marginal, and it's purely because the materials now have to come into the UK and then essentially be kitted or manufactured or processed, versus essentially everything being done on a local mileage and then essentially the final haul coming over to us. So I haven't really answered your question, but you kind of have to think about it in that sense.
Yeah, it's good to know that it's not just it's an industry-wide problem, that it's something to consider throughout the process of creating any sustainable product.
And I think from a consumer's perspective, as things evolve, maybe at the moment it seems like a big leap for people to have to pay that extra for, you know, if you are able to find a UK manufacturing or nearer, that will become less of a barrier, I think, across the next 10 years, where the cheaper options are struggling because of government regulation, and, you know, the whole equation is changing, I think. So we are nearly at time, and the kind of thing I wanted to leave you with, the message I wanted to leave you with, having painted a very grim picture at the beginning of this talk. So we imagine getting up in the morning in 10 years' time, seeing the news and kind of being left with that feeling of like, wow, perma-crisis, sustainability 2.0. But everybody in this room has an opportunity to change the course of the future. Even the small actions that you're taking today, whether that is as a brand, an investor, or perhaps as a consumer, can shift that trajectory slightly in the right direction. So there is hope, but we need to start thinking about it today, and not fear the future. You know, we see this massive kind of cloud of uncertainty ahead of us. But as a futurist, you know, I apply the right methodologies and I work with people to make sure it's not that scary and we can make change happen. So, there we go.